Hello viewers, founding Azike is my name. Today I will be talking on the subject title Identifying Electoral Frauds. Share and invite friends. Let's discuss ways and means to identify electoral fraud. Share and share. Identifying electoral fraud. Very, very important in protecting our democracy. Yes, when we talk of identifying electoral fraud, we are talking of ways to identify election malpractice. We are talking on how to identify election manipulations. Very, very important. Now, one of the fundamental features of democracy is credible and free and fair election. When we mean credible and free and fair election, we are talking of election that have no element of manipulation, intimidation, and anything that has to do with negativity. Now, another hallmark of democracy is periodic election, which suggests that in every particular season, people come together to select their leadership. So election don't come every time. By virtue of democracy, and in our community or country in particular, is usually every 4 years. So these 4 years is a year you make decisions of whom you are going to entrust with your rights to exercise on your behalf. But when we look at the way and manner these elections are conducted, the very best candidates who have the public will may not really emerge as a result of electoral fraud. Electoral fraud is punishable by law, and it doesn't allow for the best hand to emerge, thereby producing people with corrupt tendencies or to serve a particular interest. So when we talk of election fraud or electoral malpractice, we are talking of these tendencies that might arise during election. Election malpractice can start before the election and after the election and during election. So we, the voters, must be very, very attentive if really we want to protect our developing democracy, and as well elect whoever that we desire to be at the corner or corridor of power. So democracy at this point in time is under threat because of electoral fraud. So when we look at electoral fraud at the moment, we are going to look how these fraud are being perfected or executed during election. As I made mention, it happens before the election, which is pre, during and after election. So now, before the election, how do this political class perfect this electoral fraud? One of the areas they perfect this electoral fraud is called political gerrymandering. Yes, before the election, politicians who occupies positions of influence, most especially those that are in the parliament, use their influence and the access. Instead to serve the people, they use it to create a political dynasty where they manipulate the geographical location or the wards or constituencies in such a manner that a particular area will be disadvantaged while a particular area will be favored, just to win an election and build a political stronghold. What am I trying to say? A particular area being favored, such area can always have a very big advantage over the others, just because that somebody used such position to influence the demarcation, the creation of that constituency, making a particular place more populated, which is called political stronghold, and thereby make the other place depopulated, makes them to produce a dry vote. So these are done before the election, and it's a election fraud. It's an electoral fraud. So if you are a candidate, you must understand how these are done before the elections. Another way that electoral fraud are being carried out is during the registration, like what is happening in one of the eastern states, where foreigners are being deployed with foreign names. People can come and vote, or they are being registered in that area, but they have no affinity in that area. They register under age, fictitious names, and so on. These are fraud before the elections. So we must be very, very attentive to identify this electoral fraud. Invite your friends, and you can as well drop questions or topics you intend or you feel that we should discuss. Very, very important. Now, during this registration, they register people from that are not from that constituency, from that state and all that, but at the same time register fictitious names, fake names. So these are electoral frauds. These are electoral fraud. Odogu zillion. Wabado. So what we are trying to say, these things happen before the election. Another way is that now people are requested to come for empowerment. The politicians are trying to rob or grease the palms of the innocent citizens by manipulating them in the name of empowerment. These are starvation wages. Instead of creating a job that is sustainable, they only go a long way to deceive our youths with empowerment, thereby requesting them to come with their voter's card as a means of identification. Voter's card is not only your means of identification, and those empowerment are just fraud. They cannot sustain you for a very long time. Rather, the politician design it in such a way that tomorrow you come back to them and still remain a slave. So when you are being informed of empowerment and you should come with your voter's card, They are trying to manipulate your mental faculty. They are trying to make sure you become a project in their own hand. So these are things that happen before the elections and other false promises. Another way you can identify electoral fraud during the election is vote buying. We are common with it now. We are very, very knowledgeable about vote buying. People now sell their votes. People now sell their votes. So when you sell your vote, it means you are going to vote against somebody you ought to vote for, and vote for somebody that is not ready to serve your interest. So vote buying or selling is electoral fraud. During elections, politicians are going around to buy your vote in terms of thousands of naira, and when you sell these votes, you are eating your tomorrow's food today. So which means you will go hungry tomorrow. That is going to be the beginning of your suffering. Whoever that buys your vote do not have your interest. So vote buying is electoral offense. Is another electoral fraud and manipulation. You must, by all means, recognize that. No matter how they want to paint it, no, is an electoral fraud. Once you see such negotiation, whenever they approach you, they are already trying to involve you in electoral fraud. Another means where they can carry this fraud during election. Share to friends and send your topic you want us to discuss. Another way during the elections is when voters have casted their vote, the agents, if not properly monitored, can also be influenced to do a dirty job by invalidating votes that are valid. We call it void votes. They can invalidate this vote by return printing twice again, and that nullifies the votes. So these are frauds just to favor a particular candidate. So we must identify this during elections. We must identify this during elections. Electoral fraud and so on. Yes, security agencies, architecture and thereabout, and hoodlums can be used to disrupt elections, thereby making people to be afraid. So when you see people that are not ready for this election, or people that are not really there to cast their vote or exercise their franchise, you know that they are for a particular mission that is not in line with the election process. It becomes a fraud. So identifying electoral fraud is very, very important for our developing democracy. After the election, those that casted their votes, those that are counting the vote also matters. They can make up some votes for a particular candidate for financial gratification. So it is also important that you pay attention to identify these futures we are mentioning here right now. After election, they can make up some votes for a popular or unpopular candidate to ensure that such candidate emerge. It is a fraud, thereby robbing the people of their own wish and aspiration. After the election, if the umpires, the electoral body, are not properly independent, they can compromise their position, thereby making the developing democracy a very complex one. So, during election and after election, electoral fraud can be perfected. But all this electoral fraud cannot be successful if we decide to identify them and put the necessary measures in it. Thereby, our desired or our preferred candidate will emerge during elections. So it's important that you identify electoral fraud. One of the greatest disservice we can do during election is to neglect the areas whereby this political class can have their ways to manipulate the system. When they manipulate the system, you as an individual, your interest cannot be discussed or be implemented when they are coming up with policies. When you sell your vote, you cannot question the government any longer because you cannot eat your cake and have it. When you fail to identify electoral fraud, it will not produce competence. Rather, it will produce incompetence. It will also help to build the political class more and more, thereby creating a wide gap between the people and the political elite. And when you look at it, the idea of the previous society is the struggle. When you have these two classes, the political class and the people, the political class will acquire so much wealth and influence and use such influence to begin to oppress the people. So when you allow political fraud, when you compromise to their manipulation, to their sweet-coated tongue, you will be the one to suffer. For our democracy to grow, the people must be transparent. The people must show commitment for such development. So electoral fraud is really a threat to democracy. It's a threat to our growth and development. A man cannot survive or progress without the context of governance he finds himself. That is to say, your progress you make depends on how the political system is being managed. So electoral fraud is not healthy for a democracy. So during election, before the election, and after the election, they can manipulate elections. So you must be very, very careful. Play your role. Do not say your vote. When our democracy is good, you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of participation, you have credibility. It produces the best hands that will drive the economy. It will produce the very competent class that have the policies that will effect a very good change in our society. But if you sell your vote, you have yourself to blame. Do not forget, share to friends, and you can always inbox me for any topic you want us to discuss. Thank you and bye for now.